Oh, Angela's here. Somebody find her a seat in the back before Michelle and Andre's guests see her in that.
Before we continue, there's someone this family needs to thank. And I don't think most of you know her name the way you should.
That was Angela Freeman, sitting near the back of a rented banquet hall she had paid for entirely out of her own pocket, listening to her aunt announce, in front of 40 relatives, that there was someone in the room who deserved to be thanked, and having absolutely no idea in that moment that her aunt meant her. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one. And while you're down there, has your family ever quietly written you off as the one who wasn't doing as well as everyone else, without ever actually checking? Tell me about it. Now, let's go back to where this really started. Angela Freeman was 32 years old, the youngest of 3 children born to Barbara and the late Robert Freeman. And for as long as anyone in the family could remember, she had been the one everybody quietly worried about. Her older sister, Michelle, was a pediatrician outside Charlotte, with a house that made it into the family group chat every time she redid a room in it. Her older brother, Andre, was a corporate attorney in Washington, the kind of relative people mentioned first when new acquaintances asked what her family did for a living. And then there was Angela, who, as far as anyone in the family actually knew, worked the counter at a small print and copy shop in a strip mall outside Atlanta, drove a car with over 130,000 miles on it, and lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment that nobody in the family had ever actually visited. What the family did not know what Angela had made, very sure the family did not know, was that the print shop job had ended almost 6 years earlier, not long after Angela quietly walked away from it to build something of her own. If you'd spent your whole life being the family's quiet disappointment and then built something extraordinary in complete secret, how long would you keep it hidden, and what would it finally take to stop? Let me know below, because Angela was about to find out the answer to that question in front of every single person who had ever doubted her, all at once, in one room. It started, the way most quiet transformations do, with something small enough that nobody thought to ask about it. Angela had always been good with people, and even better with logistics, the girl who, since childhood, had been the one to organize the seating chart at every Freeman family gathering, the one who remembered everyone's food allergies, the one who could stretch a modest grocery budget into a full holiday spread without anyone noticing how carefully she'd shop for it. Nobody in the family had ever thought of that as a skill worth building a life around. Angela had thought about it constantly. At 26, working the print shop counter by day, she started taking on small event coordination jobs on weekends, first for a coworker's baby shower, then for a neighbor's 50th birthday party, word spreading slowly through people who had no idea her last name was Freeman or that anyone in her family would have found the work beneath her. She priced herself modestly at first, terrified of asking for more than she thought she was worth, and she poured every dollar she made straight back into better equipment, better vendor relationships, a website she built herself at 2 in the morning after long shifts. She told herself, in those early years, that she wasn't hiding it from her family exactly. She was simply not mentioning it yet, waiting for the right moment, the moment when the business felt real enough to survive her family's opinions about it. But some nights, driving home exhausted from a wedding she just spent 14 hours coordinating, she caught herself rehearsing exactly how she'd explain it to her mother, and every version of that conversation in her head ended the same way, with Barbara asking, gently but pointedly, whether Angela had really thought this through, the way she'd asked about everything Angela had ever tried. So Angela kept driving the same old car. She kept the print shop job 2 more years after she genuinely didn't need it anymore, specifically so there would be an easy, boring answer whenever anyone asked what she did for work. By 28, the small event coordination side hustle had become something else entirely. A venue owner she'd worked with recommended her to a hotel chain looking for a reliable outside coordinator for corporate retreats. That single contract nearly tripled what she'd been making. And Angela, treating it the way she'd learned to treat every unexpected windfall, banked almost all of it and kept living exactly the way she always had. Within 2 years, word had traveled far enough inside the hospitality industry that she wasn't chasing clients anymore. Clients were finding her. She named the company something deliberately unmemorable, Freeman Event Partners, technically her own last name, but generic enough that nobody skimming a vendor contract would think twice about it. and structured everything so that her name rarely appeared on anything, a client-facing document. By 30, Freeman Event Partners had a staff of 11, a warehouse full of rental inventory, and a client roster that included 2 hotel chains and a small but growing list of wealthy private clients who paid a premium specifically for Angela's reputation for making complicated events look effortless. The one person outside her family who knew the full truth from nearly the beginning was Yolanda Price, a former hotel banquet manager Angela had hired as her first full-time employee back when the company was still just Angela in a rented storage unit. Yolanda had been the one steady presence through all of it, the late nights before big weddings, the year Angela nearly lost a major contract to a competitor and came into the office pale and shaken, running numbers over and over trying to find a way to save it. More than once over the years, Yolanda had asked her, gently, why she kept the wall between her 2 lives so high, and sat in Yolanda's car in a parking lot trying not to cry about it more than once. The slow, careful build-out of a business Angela genuinely refused to talk about with anyone who shared her last name. Angela never had a fully satisfying answer, only the same tired version of the truth that the wall had gone up so long ago and so gradually that she wasn't entirely sure anymore how to take it down without everything on the other side of it collapsing along with it. None of it changed how she showed up to Thanksgiving. If anything, the secret made her more careful, not less. She drove the same aging car to family gatherings. She wore the same handful of modest, unremarkable outfits she'd had for years, specifically chosen because nothing about them invited questions. When her mother asked, every single year, whether the print shop had given her any more hours, Angela said some version of the same tired, deflecting answer and let the conversation move on to Michelle's latest promotion or Andre's newest case, the way it always did. If you'd built something you were genuinely proud of, and the people closest to you had already decided years ago exactly what kind of life you were capable of, would you correct them, or would some part of you almost enjoy watching how wrong they were? Let me know below, because Angela was about to have that exact question answered in the most public way imaginable. The trouble started, as it usually does in that family, with Aunt Patricia. Patricia had hosted the Freeman family reunion every other year for almost 2 decades, a tradition she took enormous pride in and increasingly could not afford. The venue she'd used for years had raised its rates. Half the family was flying in from 3 different states, which meant hotel blocks Patricia was quietly subsidizing out of her own modest retirement savings. The way she'd done, a little more each cycle, for longer than she wanted to admit even to herself. That year, 3 weeks before the reunion was supposed to happen, Patricia sat at her kitchen table with a stack of vendor invoices and did the math 4 separate times, hoping she'd gotten it wrong. She hadn't gotten it wrong. The number she needed to cover the venue deposit, the catering minimum, and the block of hotel rooms was more than Patricia made in 3 months. And the reunion, the one tradition that had held that scattered family together across 4 states in 2 generations, was 3 weeks from either happening or quietly falling apart for the first time in 20 years. Patricia called Michelle first, the way most of the family instinctively called Michelle first for anything involving money, and Michelle, apologetic but firm, explained she'd just closed on a lake house and simply didn't have the flexibility this particular season. She called Andre next, who offered a modest amount, generous by his own standards but nowhere close to what the gap actually required, and suggested, not unkindly, that maybe it was simply time to scale the reunion down. Patricia hadn't planned on calling Angela at all. Not because she doubted Angela's willingness. Angela had always been generous with what little she seemed to have, the way people who don't have much sometimes are, but because Patricia genuinely didn't want to ask a woman working a print shop counter to stretch herself thin for a family tradition that wasn't, strictly speaking, her responsibility to save. But 3 weeks was 3 weeks, and Patricia, out of options and mostly just needing to talk it through with someone who wouldn't lecture her, called Angela on a Tuesday evening simply to vent. Angela listened to the whole thing without saying much, the way she'd learned to listen in business meetings, absorbing details, already doing math in her head that Patricia had no idea she was capable of doing. When Patricia finished, exhausted and half joking about maybe just canceling the whole thing, Angela asked a single question. What if she told her aunt she could make sure it happened? No strings, and Patricia never had to tell another soul where the money came from. Patricia laughed at first, assuming Angela meant she'd chip in a few $100s toward the catering, and told her that was sweet but nowhere close to enough. Angela, quietly, told her aunt she wasn't talking about a few $100s. She was talking about all of it: the venue, the catering, the decorations, the hotel block for anyone flying in. Every bit of it, paid in full, under one condition. Patricia could never tell the family where the money had actually come from. The vendor contracts arrived by email a few days later, and Patricia skimmed them the way she skimmed most paperwork, barely registering the company name printed neatly across the top of every invoice. Freeman Event Partners, assuming it was simply what the outside coordinator handling everything happened to call herself. It never once occurred to her that the name on the invoice was, in every way that mattered, her own family's name. Patricia went quiet on the other end of the line for a long moment, and when she finally spoke again, her voice had changed completely. She asked Angela, gently, how a print shop counter job made that kind of money possible. And Angela, for the first time in 6 years, told someone in her family the truth. All of it: the side jobs, the hotel contract, Freeman Event Partners, the warehouse, the 11 employees, every piece of the life she'd built entirely out of her family's line of sight. If the person your whole family had quietly decided was falling behind turned out to be the only one who could actually save what mattered most to everyone, would you want that revealed the ordinary way, or would some part of you want the whole room to feel exactly how wrong they'd been all at once? Let me know below, because Patricia was about to make a decision that would answer that question for Angela before she'd even had the chance to decide for herself. Patricia begged her, more than once over the following weeks, to let her tell the family, or at least let Angela take some visible credit, a mention on the programs, a quiet acknowledgement somewhere. Angela refused every version of it, telling her aunt plainly each time that she'd rather nobody know than have it turn into a whole conversation she wasn't ready to have. Part of her told herself it was simply practical, that announcing it would only invite a flood of questions and requests she wasn't ready to field. But if she was honest with herself, lying awake some nights in the weeks before the reunion, there was something else underneath the practical reasoning too, some old, tired part of her that had spent 32 years being underestimated by people who had never once bothered to ask her a real question about her life. And some part of her, quiet and a little bit ashamed of itself, that simply wanted to watch, just once, exactly how they behaved when they thought no one worth impressing was in the room. She mentioned it to Yolanda once, a few days before the reunion, half expecting Yolanda to talk her out of it. Yolanda didn't. She listened the way she always listened, without rushing to fix anything, and told Angela plainly that she'd spent 6 years watching her build something extraordinary while shrinking herself smaller every single time her family was in the room, and that if some part of her needed this particular moment to happen exactly the way it was about to happen, Yolanda wasn't going to be the one to talk her out of it. She only asked one thing: that Angela actually let herself feel whatever came up that day, instead of doing what she always did, which was swallow it and move on to making sure everyone else was comfortable. The morning of the reunion, Angela dressed the way she always dressed for family events. A simple cotton sundress she'd owned for years, flat sandals, no jewelry beyond a plain pair of earrings, her hair pulled back the same practical way it always was. She drove the same aging car the 90 minutes to the venue, parked in the back of the lot next to newer cars belonging to relatives who had no idea whose money had paid for the very ground they were standing on. The moment she walked through the doors, she felt exactly what she always felt at these gatherings: the familiar tightening in her chest, the automatic scan of the room to see who she'd have to make small talk with, and how quickly she could find a quiet seat. Her cousin Denise spotted her first, calling across the room, half joking in the particular way that family had perfected over decades, suggesting someone find Angela a seat in the back before Michelle's and Andre's more impressive guests got a look at her outfit. A few relatives near Denise laughed, not unkindly exactly, just easily, the way people laugh at a joke they've made 100 times before about someone who's never once pushed back. Angela found a seat near the back, the way she always did, and spent the first hour of the reunion the way she spent most family gatherings, quietly present, mostly unnoticed, watching Michelle hold court near the head table about the lake house, watching Andre field questions about a case that had apparently made regional news. Nobody asked Angela anything about her own life beyond the same tired question about the print shop, and she gave the same tired answer, and the conversation moved on exactly the way it always did. It was Andre's wife, Vanessa, who finally said the thing that had apparently been building in the room all afternoon, loud enough that most of the nearby tables heard it. She'd been admiring the venue out loud, commenting on the flowers, the lighting, the quality of the catering, wondering aloud, half to Michelle, half to the table in general, how on earth Patricia had managed to afford all of it this year, joking that maybe she should ask Angela for pointers on stretching a tight budget, since Angela clearly knew a thing or two about making do with very little. The table laughed. Angela smiled the practiced, small smile she'd perfected over 3 decades of exactly this kind of comment, and said nothing at all. If you have ever sat at a table and let people laugh at exactly the wrong assumption about your life, simply because correcting them wasn't worth the energy that day, you already know exactly how Angela felt in that moment. Have you ever had someone joke about your money in front of family? And how did you handle it? Let me know below, because the next 15 minutes were about to change every single thing about how that room saw her. Near the end of the meal, Aunt Patricia stood, the way she always did at some point during the reunion, to say a few words about the family, about tradition, about how proud she was that they'd all managed, once again, to make the trip and fill the room. She talked for a few minutes the ordinary way reunions always open, thanking a few people by name for small contributions. A cousin who'd brought extra folding chairs, another who'd handled the group photo scheduling. Then Patricia paused, glanced briefly toward the back of the room, and said the room needed to hear one more thank you before they continued, one that most of them, she suspected, had no idea they actually owed. She told them, plainly, that this year's venue, the catering, the decorations, every hotel room booked for family flying in from out of state, every single piece of what they'd been enjoying all afternoon had been paid for, in full, by one person in that room. Someone who had asked for absolutely no credit and would likely be uncomfortable that Patricia was about to give her exactly that anyway. Patricia looked directly toward the back of the room and called Angela's name. The room went silent in a way Angela had genuinely never heard it go silent before. The kind of silence that has actual weight to it, 40 conversations stopping mid-sentence all at once. Denise's mouth was still half open from whatever she'd been saying a moment earlier. Vanessa's wine glass hovered, forgotten, halfway to her lips. Every single face in that room turned toward the back table, toward the woman in the simple cotton sundress they'd spent the entire afternoon quietly and not so quietly underestimating. Angela sat there for a long moment, feeling the entire trajectory of the last 6 years compress into a single breath. Every late night at the warehouse, every wedding coordinated on 4 hours of sleep, every deflecting answer she'd given her mother about the print shop, every small laugh she'd swallowed at exactly moments like the one Vanessa had created 20 minutes earlier, all of it arriving at once, in front of the very people she'd spent so long protecting herself from. She stood, slowly, smoothing the simple cotton dress she'd worn specifically because it asked nothing of anyone's attention, and told the room, in a voice steadier than she expected, that she hadn't planned on any of this, that she'd simply wanted her aunt's reunion to happen the way it always had, and that everyone was welcome. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't an accounting of 6 years of hidden success or a list of everything she'd built while they weren't looking. It was 11 quiet words, and it was more than enough. The applause that followed started slowly. A few uncertain claps from relatives who weren't entirely sure what had just happened, before it spread through the room the way understanding does once it finally lands. Michelle, from the head table, was the first to actually get up and walk the length of the room toward Angela, her expression somewhere between shock and something that looked almost like shame. Andre followed a moment later, and Vanessa, notably, stayed exactly where she was, her wine glass still hovering, her earlier joke about budget pointers apparently still catching up to her in real time. Word moved through the room the way it always does at family gatherings, in overlapping whispers and half-finished sentences, and within 20 minutes, everyone in that banquet hall knew some version of the truth that the woman, most of them had spent years politely, and sometimes not so politely, writing off as the family's quiet underachiever, had in fact been running a successful event company for the better part of 6 years, one successful enough to have quietly paid for the very room they were all standing in. Barbara found her daughter near the edge of the dance floor an hour later, away from the thickest part of the crowd, and simply stood in front of her for a moment before asking, quietly, why Angela had never told her. Angela, who had rehearsed 100 versions of this exact conversation over 6 years and never once felt ready for any of them, told her mother the truth as plainly as she could. She said she'd been waiting for a moment when she wouldn't have to defend it, and that moment had never once arrived, not because her family was cruel exactly, but because nobody had ever actually asked. Barbara didn't have much to say to that, not right away. She reached out and held her daughter's hand instead, the kind of silence that says more than most conversations manage to, and told her, eventually, that she was sorry and that she'd spent so many years worrying about the wrong child. She admitted, quietly, that some part of her had always assumed worry was the same thing as love, that checking in about the print shop year after year had felt, to her, like paying attention, when really it had only ever been the same shallow question asked on repeat, never once followed by a second one that might have actually gotten her somewhere close to the truth. Angela told her mother it was all right, though both of them understood, without needing to say it out loud, that it would take longer than one conversation on a dance floor to fully believe that. In the weeks that followed, apologies came the way they usually do after something like that, slowly and unevenly, and not always from the people who owed the biggest one. Michelle called first, admitting she'd never once asked Angela a real question about her life in years, too comfortable assuming she already knew the answer. Andre sent a long, careful text acknowledging the same thing in his own more formal way. Vanessa never directly apologized for the comment about budget pointers, though she was noticeably, permanently quieter around Angela at every family gathering that followed. Denise, for her part, cornered Angela at the very next family gathering, 6 months later, and apologized plainly for the comment at the door, admitting she'd been repeating a version of the same joke about Angela for so many years that she genuinely stopped thinking of it as unkind, just habit, the kind of thing families do to each other without ever really examining it. Angela accepted the apology and meant it when she did, though something in how easily she'd once let those comments slide had shifted permanently. She still showed up to family events. She still wore whatever she felt like wearing, sundresses included. But she no longer shrank the space she took up in a room, and the family slowly adjusted to the difference. Freeman event partners kept growing. Within a year, Angela had added a second warehouse and promoted 2 of her longest tenured employees into leadership roles she'd once handled entirely alone. Yolanda, who had spent 6 years as the only person who fully understood both halves of Angela's life, became the company's general manager, a title Angela handed her, not out of guilt, but because Yolanda had earned it a dozen times over and had never once asked for the credit while she waited. Angela still drove a practical car, though she finally traded the one with over 130,000 miles on it for something newer, less out of any need to prove anything and more, because, for the first time, she let herself want something simply because she wanted it. The next Freeman family reunion, 2 years later, Patricia asked Angela, gently, whether she wanted to help plan it properly this time. No secrecy required. Angela said yes, and for the first time in her adult life, walked into a family gathering, not hiding a single piece of who she actually was. And that's the lesson worth sitting with from this one. The people who quietly do the most for a family are rarely the ones bragging about it at the table, and the family members everyone's decided are falling behind are sometimes the only ones actually holding things together. Underestimating someone costs you more than you think, because the day the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't just correct the record, it makes you replay every small, careless comment you never thought twice about making. If someone in your life has always seemed a little quieter about their success than everyone else, that's not the same thing as having none. If this story reached something in you, subscribe and turn on that notification bell, because this channel is built on exactly these kinds of stories, and there's always another one waiting.